I'll take a brief moment just to express my gratitude for seems like literally thousands of volunteers last week for the installation, from setup and hospitality and parking and cleanup and activities for the children, and so many little details that I couldn't possibly remember. I'm so grateful to you all and to the folks who helped, for the folks who helped from afar, those who were here in body or spirit, helping to move this ministry forward in some beautiful ways. And also to the staff and the worship committee and the search committee for this stole that you get to see this morning. A lovely gift, but they didn't want to take off my grandpa's stole during the service. That was probably nice to my family. So grateful to receive it after the service. So thank you all. I feel really blessed and humbled and honored to do this ministry together. So they had arranged it all perfectly, it seemed. They had prepared the space, and they had made the calls and planned every detail down to the second, down to the minutest detail. They had backup plans and backup plates and backup papers and backup people. So it was a certainty, it was a guarantee, etched in stone with foolproofness, that this was going to be the best. The best party, picnic, birthday, interview, garden, worksite, wedding, baby shower, installation, and the absolute best and most perfect, insert the name of your event in your mind here. And then, those dreaded words, and then, the table collapsed, or we had a falling out with the relatives, or it rained, or someone fell, or the bus was late, or the bread was moldy, and there was traffic, or there were storms, and we got the wrong date because we forgot to invite them, and we didn't think of this, and we got the wrong that, or life just happened again and again. In spite of our best plans, our best intentions, our sincere hope, life still happens. We fail and we falter and we make mistakes, not because we're failures, not because we're deficient, not because we didn't try, but because of one very true and very real gift and challenge. We're human in all its messiness and in all its beauty and in all its complexity, because we spill not only milk, writes Nancy Schaefer, but we spill seed on soil that we thought was fertile but isn't. We spill whole lives, we tear friendships, we tear mountainsides. We forget not only why we went into the kitchen, but also we forget entire lexicons of joy. We weep at words once said as if we could try to call them back, because we are imperfect and we love so deeply and we will never have enough days. We live in a culture that isn't too forgiving of our humanity. We live in a religious tradition that hasn't always been too understanding of imperfections and failures, of not living up to our best values, our ideal selves. Ours is a tradition that talked about the perfectibility of the human soul, the perfectibility of humanity. I don't know about you, I haven't quite reached that, and when I look around our world, I don't think we have. Too often, the messages that we hear in families, at work, on TV or social media, in the classroom, the boardroom, or the living room, even from those we might call close friends, whether it's spoken plainly or it's coded in some type of metaphor or imagery that, compared to good poetry, seems sinister and abrasive and constrictive. The message we hear is that we simply don't measure up. We don't fit the mold. We don't get it right. As much as we're cool and composed and we've got all our stuff together on the outside, the inside of us is like a pinball machine of messages bouncing between childhood and now and everywhere in between. And each little ding is something that we have heard or seen or understood overtly or subtly about who we are, about ourselves, how to look, what to wear, where to shop, that you need to be successful, you need to be smart, you need to be well-read and well-educated, extra just and uber-conscious of the world and its injustices. You need to be intellectual, but also down to earth. You need to dismiss superstition of aesthetic spirituality, but you need to have a strong spiritual practice and a connection to the energy of the universe. And if you don't, you can't keep up. You're not up to snuff. You don't drive the right car, you don't eat the right foods, you don't shop at the right co-ops, you don't attend the right rallies. You need to dress nicely, but not pretentiously. You need to be more spiritual and more ethical and more just. You just need to be better. The list goes on and on and on until it's just a litany of shortcomings, a treatise of who you ought to be, which you're pretty sure, as you reflect on it, isn't you. When we bless and dedicate babies in our churches, we affirm their beauty. We speak to them of the importance of kindness and compassion and generous hearts. We invite them to live lives of justice and hospitality, forgiveness and love, learning from good teachers and role models, treating people as sacred, as beloved, honoring the beauty of this earth and all cultures and all people and all land and all water. We invite them to live in some sort of common rhythm with all things, for the flourishing of their own life, for the flourishing of the wider world. Not too long ago, as a colleague of mine was dedicating a child who was about 1.5, maybe 2 years old, the ceremony of dedication seemed a little different than when we have an infant in our arm and in the arms of their parents. Because this child was, to the horror of her parents and grandparents and the uneasiness of my colleague, and to the horror of every cleric trying to ever bless a child in any house of worship, this child was mobile. It started off simple enough, speaking about the importance of the water which we bless them with, how it connects them with the earth and the land and the water and the stars. Then speaking about the rose that we bless them with, that it reminds them of the beauty of the world, the beauty of their own soul, all children, all people, etc., etc. And then the child began moving. It started with squirming in her mother's arms, and then she was set down, set free, and now all of a sudden this was a liturgical field and we had ourselves a free-range child. And my colleague spoke these words: "May she remember that her life is her own, and may you grant her every freedom as she discovers for herself her path in life, that she may have a strong sense of self." Well, she had a strong sense of self. This blessed child-to-be began walking away from the table holding the water and the rose, away from her parents and her family, away from the minister who, although speaking of her life path, was wishing she hadn't chosen to start off on it right at this moment. And the parents, with their rose-colored embarrassment, smiled anxiously, feeling unable to contain her because, given the words that were being spoken, that didn't seem quite right. So the congregation read a blessing together, smiled and laughed. What else could they do as the words just jumped off the page and the child jumped out of the arms holding her, and life broke out of its small little container, because in that moment, embodying in a way that really only the written words of that blessing could have anticipated, they were filled with the words of Khalil Gibran: "Your children are not your children. They are life's longing for itself." Our lives can't be contained. This child's, our own, anyone, by a neat and clean container, by a nicely pressed tablecloth or altar cloth or white lace dresses blessed by roses in the yellow light of autumn, because those threshold moments themselves remind us that being human is messy and it's beautiful. And even at that young age, we say something to acknowledge the capacity that we each have to harm either ourselves or others, our capacity to be selfish and neglectful, judgmental, because we know it's up to each of us and all of us together to help build and create and sustain the conditions in which the best parts of us can flourish. Our compassion, our kindness, our generosity, our love might flourish far more than our shortcomings. And even as we fail or fall short or worse, we can find in each other, if we've got good folks around us, forgiveness, so that we might rise back to our best selves even when we have faltered, sometimes mightily. Too often this world isn't very forgiving. Our loved ones, even ourselves, aren't too forgiving of the messiness and the imperfections and the challenges of life, not too forgiving of this house of humanity that we build, that poet John Carpenter writes about in this way in his poem Mistakes. He says, "The taps drip all night and won't let me sleep. The paint is peeling. The table, the sofa, the staircase, they're all coming apart. Nothing works. I call the electrician. I call the painter. The plumber shows me a deep furrow in the washer scratched by a tiny grain of rust. The pale ash of a whole cigarette curls in the ashtray. Cold coffee sits in the bottom of my cup. Everything is recorded, it seems nowadays, thousands of pointless gestures, what you had tried to forget and to erase from the past. But now you can't disguise yourself. You cannot get away. You are rattled, tongue-tied, and feel a sense of falling. There is no ending, only incompleteness. The promise that you can never exhaust yourself. The mistakes you find yourself making and remaking until you are at home with all you touch, living at last in the paradise of the imperfect. I don't know about you, but that seems to be where I live. This house of humanity, this paradise of the imperfect, making and remaking mistakes, spilling milk and infertile seeds all over the place, tearing the cloth in relationships and trying over and over again to be my best self. Trying over and over again to try to make things right, make things better, and then something happens. Something happens when you try to forgive yourself or another. You get up and you try again no matter how hard the day before was. It can be a hard place to be, knowing our failures, our imperfections, hearing the narratives at the same time in our families, in our societies and cultures, in our traditions of how we don't measure up. Ours is a church, imperfect as it is, that strives to help us be who we are called to be each. Ours is a church that amidst all the messiness of life, we say, don't measure yourself with scales and tapes. Put them away. The plumb lines, the calipers, your gauges, thermometers, scales, tintometers. You are beloved, and you are broken, and beloved still, just as you are. Unitarian minister A. Powell Davies in the 1940s wrote this: "Let me tell you why I come to church," he says. "I come to church, and I would, whether I was a preacher or not, because I fall below my own standards, and I need to be constantly brought back to them. I'm afraid of becoming selfish and indulgent, and my church of the free spirit brings me back to what I want to be. I could easily despair. Doubt and dismay could easily overwhelm me. My church renews my courage and hope. It's not enough that I should think about the world and its problems at the level of a newspaper report or a magazine discussion. I must feel again," he says, "the love that I owe to others. I must not only hear about it, but feel it. And in church, I'm brought in every way back toward my best." And I would add, we do that together. And churches don't always do that at the best they can either, but we sure try. As we sang this morning, "If I stumble, will you help me? If I stumble, will you help me?" Or as we'll sing in a moment, how far and wide we stray from who we want to be. The letter fails, the systems fall, and every symbol wanes, but eternal love remains. Sometimes when the burden is heavy and hard to bear, we need to pause for a moment to not only remind ourselves of who we want to be, but to find a shred, a breath, a moment of forgiveness for how we have failed. Forgiveness from ourselves, from our loved ones, from whatever sacred source of love that feels large enough, strong enough, forgiving enough to hold you. We need moments to be held by a love that's larger than us all, by a community that's larger than the self, by these strong and unsteady souls right next to us. "Is there an angel in the house?" writes Pat Schneider. "If there is, come to me. And if you aren't too tired or otherwise occupied, if it isn't too tacky a request, please rock me. I am bruised. If you will hold me till morning, I promise I will rise, and I will light the fire, and I will break the bread and put back on my shoulder my corner of the world. But for now, I could use the shelter of a wing. Excuse me, is there an angel in the house?" Sure, you've spilled more than milk. You've made and remade mistakes. They are built into our humanity, like a purposeful flaw in a mosque, or a misstitched thread in a tapestry or a quilt. But now is the time to put away the gauges and the scales, to take a breath under the shelter of another's wing, so that you can rise again in the morning to the fire and to the bread, and to remember again who you are and who you are called to be. like in these words from Rebecca Edmonston Lang. She says, "Come into this place which we make holy by our presence. Come in with all your vulnerabilities and strengths, your fears and anxieties, your loves and hopes. For here you need not hide, nor pretend, nor be anything other than who you are and who you are called to be. Come into this place where the ordinary is sanctified, the human is celebrated, the compassionate is expected. Come into this place where you can heal and be healed, forgive and be forgiven. Sometimes you just need the shelter of a wing, even for a moment, so that you can breathe and find the ground beneath you again." We'll sing together hymn number 10 in the gray hymnal, Immortal Love.